Mas tos is nig chonju as yn doli gael gan y BBC joch jolavan ho galson gan a 3 minuten. Pitchen is tos chonju beske ma sam nog is gewel se billig am chlointjen agus faatje le hunne chonju seo gan a chole a go laatje an de shomer de chole agus pro Microsoft Teams. Toshi mi chonju is egalig a an noorsin hik sin go kusbare budget ha mi dolle sachan an beole. Agus mis toshi sin chonju eori me an cholige Johnny McKeevad trorige le faculoni.
O'r nahad y tanef, gyng lori dan amsgyn i gyda riach. As yn tar ta'n gwt, ysyn nghorym mi canach gan i hos yn hwm ar yw'r ele, agos cwydach cwrws yn hatyn ysdiachad loen. As yn ta'n gael ysyn y cwmys yn ha gywr ha gynwriau sy'n ei gianw, agos y cwmys yn hawl tar gais yn ha gobar na hynol yn sy'n gain. As yn tar ta'n gwt ysyn lwch gobar chac yn gilyr. Bys yn smach yn iawn i ha skriven de haaskin gain tan a strechan na had viakin haaskin ha gover gekonoring gain bi despot agus tinko cogunion a schon mai yn llwag hasin ni siorwch gach hasin ni gyr gestúru sé agus gemine cogunion hasin tin hige gama vor llwag at er roran agus canvarai agus a hulle den ha sin. As yn tart thank you gan y lwch gobrach, had yn ober fi arfalach. Agus gyr i gymryd cwrw ys gan iastach agus tart gaif cwydach ag. Gyharad idd ha ni yn dwlich ac ddi gianw agus. Gymryd tart gaif yn iastach ys o'n sy'n i gianw. As yn ysmynach ag gwys na tachart y ffag yn hwyl. Rwydyn ha tachart ysga nadar. Mae'n cri halamain agus tŵltyn agus. Mae'n slef agus ceelt yn cwydach. Da'n y cawl y mehag yn agus chahig sy'n gyhon. Ach, edrych chi sy'n ddod sy'n rwyd yn hamach yn y hen y dianw. An y cogian gan chiol. Sy'n smynach edrych Ukraine agus es yn erfianach. Am natach yn ela cwydach ffag yn hwyl nach sy'n ffiw cloent yn mae un. As sy'n sian gymryd byw cwr yn y. Cwydach iad sy'n habron ag yn naim sio. Cwydach as nath ac yn hyn an i hogus. Ffag yn hwyl ma'n hwrt mi. As sy'n nogus gan o'r cawarstach gaif. Gan o'r taich gaif tron laich yn dorach a han rwmp. As sy'n gyr ag ymwyr cwr i nio'n ha hwlang tienis byg tra fwyg na traumeintyn. Gymwyr cwr ywys yn ysga Gefeiad ed asgon iarst agus go ate fan miad na sherwish yn mach gan y teolich yn achs gan y carriagins na cooprych yn ach na ffag yn naid. As sy'n smach eich lawn. As sy'n gyr gymig at y cainach ag yn chrwch ar an laich yn nog. A stig na droch laich yn agus na mrwyd na blionich yn. Het cwrin yn agus pegain stúr cwydych sy'n leis na cogwni yn hasyn doi hianw. Agus hasyn gyri sy'n agus gymaith ein yr ule pechna. Yn sgach ddios da men.
Papleisje, mae'n sy'n mi cefod. Sa chwnio nis ga klare agus biarioting et larach line koele is steine chwnio. Iori minisja de Derek McKay, manager reologus agus tuien een lagedoch leven gemaakt.
Nach Gordon,
on the show.
Leader, Deputy Leader, Para agus Waterside, Kenneth John McLean,
Sure.
Ian A. McNeil, Usta Jess Eriski agus Benavilla, Ian M. McLeod, Susan Thompson,
I'm here.
Usta Tua, Mustafa Hussein, Councillor
Apologies,
Hussein is
I'm
present online.
present. I'm here.
Ushan Robertson, Herich, Paul Finnegan,
I'm sure.
Grant Fulton,
I'm sure.
Kieran Loch, Robert Mackenzie, Angus Morrison, Skierug agus Carlavach, Ronald Fraser, Norman MacDonald, Cliff Shear agus Nish, John Norman MacLeod,
And sure.
Donald McSween, Luchatua, Donald F. Crichton, John A. McKeever, Colin McLean,
And sure.
John Luchatua, Ian M. Macaulay, Malcolm K. MacDonald, Gordon Murray, John Jace, Ray Mackenzie. I have apologies from Councillor Angus McCormack, Dr. Francis Murray, George Murray. Skieran Rue, I have apologies from Councillor Norrie MacDonald, Finlay M. Stewart. 27 members of the Comhairle present.
Okay, tablaisha, manche mi kai. Agus am riola gyfel cwsbar na ga, agus y tri egnoch. Gus corm hort donna chwnle y mudge or son Davin is tri digit keer digit steoge. Sma u jaku aan de cwsbar sy mi edda chlaro broch, begorga i sinne chlarig ik yn aim sio. Na sé agus ground tron a chonju ik yn nuig gyr yn nare ioring adda fe chlarig ik yn aim sio. Agus am na fi chlarig uig, fe ga femol na nisig bail, go sionat y chlarig uig, Cwydych chi sio le'r cogunion y fi nes hysgolge agus nesaliath gan phobl. I will now move into English, and first of all, before we go into item 2, I would like to welcome Lisa Kiddo, Strategic Finance Consultant, who is helping us to develop our financial strategy to our first meeting of the Comhairle. So welcome, Lisa. Item number 2 on the agenda is the report of the meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee of 22nd February 2023 at 2:40 p.m. And this report has been uploaded to SharePoint, and I will now ask the leader, Councillor Paul Steele, to present to us the 2023-24 budget as proposed by the Policy and Resources Committee.
Thank you, Convener. This is the first budget of this term of the Comhairle and my first as leader. And before we go any further, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the hard work of the Budget Board, representing all wards and political groups, in considering, discussing and ultimately recommending what is now before us in the Budget and Council Tax Setting Report. That process began in mid-2022 and has been a thoughtful and considered process, working through seminars, Policy and Resources Committee, and of course this Council chamber. I would also like to thank employees in all services, but particularly the finance team, who have prepared all the supporting documents within the budget folder, which will be considered at Council later today. My thanks also to the Chief Executive Malcolm and Chief Financial Officer Norman for providing the most up-to-date information and guidance throughout the process, with the financial settlement figures and instructions from Scottish Government changing even as late as yesterday. The budget comes before the Comhairle at a time of unprecedented pressures on both our revenue and capital budgets, and on public sector finance in Scotland generally. Added to these pressures have been significant and fluctuating increases in the costs of, well, everything: fuel, energy, commodities, construction materials, food and travel. In fact, everything which contributes to people's well-beings and to a functioning economy. All of these have conspired to bring about a cost of living crisis, not just for individuals and households, but also for the organisations and authorities such as the Comhairle, which support the community with their jobs, their services and our political advocacy. Having managed the largest funding reduction of any local authority in Scotland during the last term, we have protected frontline services to the public as much as possible with a prudent, sensible approach to the realities of the financial situation we have found ourselves in. But it's been a process of transformation and cuts that has left many services stretched. Despite this, we have been able to do much to support the people as best we can. I was particularly pleased to see the Comhairle establish a cost of living support fund. Unsurprisingly, the fund has received a number of excellent applications from groups and organisations in the third sector throughout the Western Isles. We have ensured that we are able to assist them to do what they want to do in support of individuals and communities. In many ways, this continues the good work shown throughout the islands in people supporting each other throughout the COVID pandemic, which I witnessed firsthand through Resilient Youth, and now in the COVID recovery period. We have also issued around £142,000 to individuals in receipt of council tax benefit, and that work is ongoing to support those less well off in our communities, but also those described as the working poor. It's an unfortunate phrase, but they are the people who will come to rely on our services more and more, so we need to be able to fund and provide these services to them throughout the year. Likewise, we have once again made a balanced and equitable choice of distribution of our Crown estate funding among wards and communities, and recognising the need to support islands-wide strategic projects by retaining a strategic fund which will supplement to some degree the lack of match funding opportunities which have disappeared from other budgets. At the same time, we have retained support for travel for those representing the Western Isles, for sports and other organisations to have free access to our facilities, and in providing the means of support for community empowerment. But my primary duty today is to present you a balanced budget. While I'm delighted to say that I can, it has been a challenge as never before. Once again, the Comhairle has a draft budget which aims to manage our scarce resources in a way which continues to deliver the services on which our communities depend, and which still supports sufficient capacity for the Comhairle to take forward its own political strategy, its policies, its community leadership for the communities of the Western Isles, and our all-important work on public sector reform, renewable energy and net zero, community empowerment, apprenticeships, economic development, and the lesser seen work on such vital areas as financial inclusion, employability and resilience. This year, unlike others, we have not suffered a real terms funding cut to our revenue budget, but seen a small increase in unallocated spend of around £894,000. It is unfortunate, however, that the benefits of that increase have been subsumed in the costs of meeting inflationary and other pressures. Our budget has, as ever, been prepared on the basis of absolute realism, reflecting the pay increases and inflation may once again require revision of the budget within the course of the financial year. You should be in no doubt that the volatility of the world and national economies is such that the need to revisit the budget mid-term is a distinct possibility. Having reserves to use when times are hard is, in my view, an essential element of a responsible budget strategy. This year, it is once again clear that without the Comhairle's policy of retention of a proportionate level of reserves, we would be looking at damaging and unprecedented cuts in public services, and almost certainly an end to our policy of no compulsory redundancies as an instrument of budget control. If this budget is agreed, our reserves, even if we used all our unearmarked reserves, including the £3.5 million minimum balance held, will not be sufficient to cover the 24-25 predicted deficit of £6.5 million. Regrettably, we are still working with one-year settlements from government, which makes strategic financial planning particularly difficult, and which necessitates the identification of reserves to mitigate these significant year-on-year variations. Inflation is still likely to be around 5% for most of 2024-25, and public sector pay likely to reflect that figure. We have used every feasible savings from services, and it is a tribute to the services which I have identified yet another £1.7 million of savings to be taken forward, if we can, in this coming financial year. Very disappointingly, Scottish Government chose to intervene in our budget preparations at the last minute by declaring its intention to impose financial penalties on councils which are considering, as one of their necessary options, a reduction in teacher numbers in an attempt to control budgets and to protect other services. The Comhairle is in this category and is potentially vulnerable to financial penalty of around £250,000 less than the identified savings of nearly £700,000. But it's our position that councils should have the choice as to how they spend their funds locally and be accountable for these choices. If savings cannot be taken from one area, they will logically have to be taken from another. These are exactly the kind of choices we are elected to make, having listened to our officers' advice. For health and social care, a service which we all highly value, I'm pleased to propose that we retain our practice of recent years of maintaining the allocation to the Integration Joint Board at previous year levels, together with additional funding included within the settlement and a proportional share of government funding for the current year pay award. We look forward to the opening of the GoTill project later this year. Transportation and Infrastructure and Policy and Resources Committee have heard of this series that the tender prices for our much valued winter maintenance service are such that the available budget is likely to be exceeded in future years. This and other pressures such as Scottish Government clawback demonstrates why it is so important that we take the £600,000 income from the proposed council tax rise, without which our services become more vulnerable. At this point, I would like to speak about council tax. None of us wish to raise taxes, but neither do we wish to cut services to deal with a current inflation rate of around 10%. The proposed tax increase of 5% is obviously about half the rate of inflation and represents a reasonable compromise between the need to maintain our services and operations and not imposing high tax burdens on residents. We have an amendment in front of us today proposing no increase in council tax, and that loss of around £600,000 be addressed by reducing our reserves still further. Any proposal to freeze council tax will severely restrict the council's ability to maintain services to help those hardest pressed and most in need. And the amendment, in my view, will actually do more harm than good to the very people it suggests it's helping. Full council tax reduction is available to those who are unable to pay council tax. But let us be in no doubt, it is by this council retaining some flexibility to do good with what little uncommitted monies we have, which makes all the difference. Freezing the tax and losing that resource would be the wrong decision. We all know of real examples of discretionary services which are not otherwise funded and which help people directly and practically. But if reserves are diminished and used up and there's no capacity within the budget, no service can be provided. This organisation performs very well with the lowest levels of management in any of the island councils, with the biggest cut in revenue funding, and I question whether the community would thank us for limiting our options even further. The recommendations on council tax equate to an increase of £1.18 per week for the Band D taxpayer, and 89% of our properties are in Bands A to D. Finally, to capital, here again, we see a diminishing and thoroughly disappointing settlement. Our capital settlement will see us unable to do much more than look after existing assets and property in the next term. And even then, it doesn't come close to allowing us to maintain everything. In particular, reference to roads, we have a backlog of £61.1 million worth of work that should be done to avoid an amber or red rating. This capital allocation only allows us to manage the decline of the roads network, some of the most important infrastructure in our islands. I'm pleased to see our continuing commitment to the Barra and Battersea Community Campus reflected in an increased allocation, as it has been an aspiration of the Comhairle for a number of years now to improve facilities across the islands. It is easy to say that there are options such as Levelling Up Fund and Share Prosperity Fund and the Growth Deal for the islands, and without these we would be in a very poor position indeed, but they are one-off non-recurring funds which don't allow strategic capital planning and which don't allow us to think efficiently about the facilities and properties which we need in the future. Despite the fact that our capital allocation this year is 40% less than it was 5 years ago, our officers have done some great work in accessing funds for projects from other sources. So in conclusion, what you have before you is a balanced budget based on realistic and prudent financial planning, and one which I commend to you.
Thank you very much, Leader. So can I have a seconder for the Leader's budget, please?
I second the budget.
Seconded by the Deputy Leader, Councillor Duncan McInnes. There are two amendments which have been circulated to members, and the first amendment has been proposed by Ms Susan Thompson, and I will now invite Ms Thompson to read her amendment.
Thanks for that, Convener. The amendment is this council recognising the real hardship being faced by many members of our community who work hard to strive for their families, to have a warm home and decent, wholesome food on the table, wishes to support them, and for that reason will not add to their financial burden by increasing their council tax for 2023-2024 funded from balances.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms Thompson. Do we have a seconder to the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Johnny McKeever. The second amendment has been proposed by Dr. Frances Murray, and I will now invite Dr. Murray to read her amendment.
With reference to the report of the meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee of 22nd February 2023, I would move as an amendment firstly to remove the link with the timetable in secondary staffing reduction, as this work has not yet been completed, to reduce the proposal to 2 posts across the 4 schools. Do not implement the reduction of ESN support, and to await the results of the library service review before making any recommendation of savings, with any shortfall to be funded from the savings accruing from the industrial action by teachers.
Thank you very much, Murray. Do we have a seconder?
Seconded, convener.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gordon Murray seconds Murray's amendment. Leader, do you accept either amendment?
No.
Okay. We will now consider the amendment proposed by Susan Thompson against the motion proposed by the council leader. And the order of debate will be the mover of the motion, the leader, first of all, then the mover of the amendment, Councillor Susan Thompson, then the seconder of the motion, Councillor Duncan McInnes, and the seconder of the amendment, Councillor Johnny McKeever. So, leader, and before we start as well, you have 5 minutes each to move and second the motions and the amendments.
Thank you very much, convener. You've obviously heard my reasoning in the last few minutes, so I'll not take up too much time at this stage, and maybe just go across to Susan, and we'll get debate in the chamber, and I'll maybe just give a bit more detail in the summing up, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you for that, convener. Thanks, leader. We're all acutely aware of the budget situation that we face, and I acknowledge the comments of the leader. We are all also too aware of the situation that other councils in Scotland find themselves in. Glasgow City Council's deliberations have been made public in the press. But I think it's fair to say that we're not in exactly the same situation as many of the other councils throughout the country. In fact, we're in the very fortunate position of having reserves. The SNP group were all elected in a manifesto that pledged to freeze council tax if reserves of at least 2% were held. That threshold has been met, and therefore it is incumbent on the group to propose freezing the council tax for this financial year. The situation with reserves may not apply next year, and we may not be able to offer this support to families at that time, but we can and we should offer it now. We are very different to the other councils by virtue of our geography and our demographics. Many of our residents are on fixed incomes, and as we all know, we have the highest levels of fuel poverty in Scotland, and that was before the spiralling costs of fuel. A situation made all the more perverse given the amount of renewable electricity that we produce and export. When we know that fuel and food prices, rent and interest rates are all increasing, with providers passing on their increased costs, and in the case of energy suppliers, corporate greed, passing on their increased cost to families who don't have anyone else to pass it on to, they bear the brunt. The Robertson Trust and the Poverty Alliance have both published research showing that many low and fixed income families are being pushed into debt and arrears by the public bodies that are meant to be helping them through the cost of living emergency. Their research has found those on the lowest incomes are 10 times more likely to have council tax arrears than those on the highest, and that 3 in 4 of those families with debts have avoided using heating and have cut down on or avoided entirely meals. No decision is consequence-free, and there is a trade-off in this one, as always. We will use some of our reserves, but in doing so, we can offer some support to those often working families who don't qualify for council tax reduction, but are increasingly being pushed into poverty. Please support the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thompson. Can I now ask the seconder of the motion, Councillor Duncan McInnes, to speak?
Thank you, convener.
This, as we're all aware, is the first budget that this new council is discussing. And firstly, I'd like to put on record, the excellent stewardship that the previous council and officials and members had in handing over to this new council the position that we are currently in, where we have a balanced budget and looking at an increase of 5%, because had the previous council not held reserves back and had a prudent management vision in the previous one, would be looking at something like 10% increase in council tax this year. So I think one has to be very prudent and manage a balanced budget as we move forward, because anything else, as we're looking at a flat rate budget going ahead, will mean that if we do freeze council tax this year, that the pain will be taken far more next year. And if we look at those that are, what we're talking about here is an increase ranging from about 80 pence in a week to about £1.20 for where the majority of the council tax bandings are, from 89% are in that council tax banding from A to D. And in addition to that, there's over 1,800 of those houses that qualify for council tax reduction. And it's clear that looking at the overall situation and challenging position we face or are faced at the moment, with inflation running at 10%, that we're putting in front of you all here today a very prudent approach on 5% increase in council tax. And if we look at those that are particularly vulnerable, old age pensioners, for example, from April this year, they have been allocated an increase of 10.1% on their state pension, which has been the highest recorded ever since the pensions were introduced. So those that are most in need on the elderly side are more than adequately covered by the percentage of their pension. And when we look at what other things that we are discussing, the Scottish Government has already given us an indication of what we should charge for water and sewage rates, which is 5%. So we are getting, the signal we are getting from Edinburgh is to have a 5% increase in tax. I'm not hearing in water and sewage, so I'm not hearing anyone challenging the position that has come from central government, which is we have no option on that. So as we move forward, I think moving ahead, I think it would be prudent to go with the recommendation that is here, and certainly we'd like to thank, on behalf of the Comhairle, the officers that have prepared. We've been through budget boards, and I think we've got a model of the way forward where we've been open as a Comhairle right throughout from very early in the year when we knew what was facing us. And I think I commend the officers that have done the service business plans, the risk register, and the business community plans, and the budget book that was provided, done very, very professionally. And I must say that as a Comhairle, we are very fortunate to have such professional council employees in the various departments. And looking ahead, we have to make sure that we're planning for next year as well, where we're looking at a deficit of 6.5 million. So if we're looking at taking 600,000 out of the council tax increase, plus another 500,000 with the other amendment, that will become, an unsustainable level. And by not moving with the recommendation here in front of us, there will be very significant restructuring that would have to be done very, very quickly by officials within the Comhairle, and the damaging consequences that would have on services and the reduction of services which were required from a very early state as we move into the current financial year. So with those, I commend the recommendation of a 5% increase in the Comhairle to members.
Thank you very much, Councillor McInnes. I'll now ask the seconder of the amendment, Councillor John A. McKeever, to speak.
Taparat, I echo Councillor Susan Thompson's comments. Families face many issues in our islands at the moment with rising costs. We have a huge high fuel poverty. There's been an increase in rents. There's water rates and sewage rates are going up as well. Yes, there's nothing we can do, as Councillor McInnes mentioned. There's nothing we can do about water rates and sewage rates, but we can do something about council tax rates. And as Councillor Thompson urged us to try and help this year, and we can, because we might not be in this position next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKeever. Does any other member wish to speak on this debate? Councillor Ray McKenzie.
I agree, of course, with the amendment. People from Bud to Barra are going through the most difficult times at present. Cost of food is sky high, cost of energy is sky high, cost of everything due to inflation is sky high. Rents have increased by HHP. They've increased by 6%, I think, just now. So in the last month, people just can't afford to wait. It's all very well to. I'm surprised actually that Councillor McInnes brought in the question of pensioners getting a 10% rise. I've got to declare an interest in that, I must say, but they didn't. I wish they'd had it last year and the year before. You know, it's possibly making up a wee bit of leeway, but pensioners are struggling. Personally, I'm not including myself in that, but pensioners throughout the islands are struggling, and they've been hit from all directions. And we know that the food has. Every time you go into a shop nowadays, whether it's well, it doesn't matter which shop, but the food prices are going up by the day. Energy costs are going up by the day. So it's extremely difficult. It's hitting from all sides. And I don't think that it's fair on this council to increase the council tax by 5%. I mean, somebody was talking that they were, possibly going to raise it by 3%. That's not even going to be 3%. It's going to be 5. And that is a tremendous amount on top of all the trials that people are facing at the present time. This still, I mean, the cost of that would still leave approximately 3 million in contingencies, plus balances, which I think the Chief Executive mentioned earlier on today, about 1.1 million, and there's other balances in our accounts. So I support the amendment, and I think people from the Bud to Barra will be affected badly by this if we actually went ahead with 5%.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor McKenzie. Councillor Kenneth McLean.
Thank you, Convener. So I'm.
Can you speak up, Councillor McLean, please?
Sorry. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I'm in favour of the increase. So it's not very pleasant, and it's well, yeah, just the vast majority of the people who do need help, the help is there. I was literally in work today filling out a council tax reduction form. As was pointed out, the vast majority of the households fall in the lower bands. And I feel as though this has to be done. Otherwise, we're going to have to start looking at forced redundancies and cutting of services that are already pretty, dire as is. Speaking to people on the ground, everyone I've spoken to past couple of days about this, everyone seems to understand that, if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. We need services. There's no two ways about it. Yes, for example, old people might struggle, but we still need to care for them as well, and that money has to come from somewhere. We could blame Westminster and say they haven't given enough money to Scotland. All right, fair enough. Then that burden has then been passed on from Holyrood to local councils, and we can't pass it out. There's no one below us. We have to make the decision, and if we have to raise taxes, so be it. We'll just have to be the bad guys. Possibly, I don't know if it's feasible or not, and it's probably not feasible to discuss right now. But if this goes through, maybe we could look at adjusting the thresholds on who can actually get council tax reduction to sort of widen that net. But yeah, I just this is the first year where Brexit, Ukraine, everything, this perfect storm is hitting us now, and this is the first year. If we start dipping into the reserves in the first year, then there'll be nothing, next year and the year after, and so on and so forth. There needs to be some degree of responsibility here. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor McLean. Does any other member wish to speak on this debate? Councillor Ian Macaulay.
Thanks, Chair. Excuse me. Thanks, Chair. I think I personally have a bit of difficulty using money that we could later on use for vulnerable families to replace a tax that is not primarily really, but is that already protects vulnerable families. And to me, it would be replacing a tax that possibly people that can afford this wouldn't have to pay it. Whilst if that money was saved for a later date, it then could be used for people, as I say, are exempt from this tax anyway. It would make much more sense in my eyes. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Macaulay. Councillor Ian MacLeod.
Thank you, Chair. Although I fully appreciate where the amendment is coming from, I would hope that most people who would be affected by this are already in receipt of some help already. Revolving around in my head the figures, so if we don't put this council tax up by 5%, we lose 600,000 this year. But if you roll that into the rest of this term, we've lost 2.4 million and onwards and onwards. So it's something worth considering when people are making that final deliberations, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Gordon Murray.
Thank you, Chair. I also have been speaking to families, low-income families, who are really struggling at this present time, really struggling. There was an announcement by HHP to put a 6% rent increase. Energy costs are going up exponentially, and now we're going to add to their burden by putting a 5% increase in council tax. Low-income families will be pushed into debt because of this, and that will lead to more social issues, affect families and health. And now we have an opportunity. We've got the money. We've put the choice in front of councillors to give families a reprieve, to stand shoulder to shoulder with the low-income families in our communities, and we have the money to do it. So I'd like to thank Councillor Thompson and Councillor McKeever for bringing this amendment forward. It's an important amendment. Do we really want to increase the burden on our families and our communities? I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Murray. Do any other members want to speak to Councillor Donald Crichton?
Thank you, Convener. I think it's really important to reiterate the point that Mr. McInnes made about our budget strategy. Not only in the last council, but the council before, in the last 10 years, we have stuck to a budget strategy which has protected us from the worst aspects of the block grant cuts that we have that have impacted upon us. And I think because of that, we are in a very good position compared to other local authorities. But we are running out of road now. I know that in the past that some have wanted to raid the reserves. We have rejected that, and we have used the reserves prudently and wisely. And I think that's what we should do today and continue ahead on the strategy that we have outlined over the last 10 years. Because we are in a very precarious position now, we are really running out of road. If we had raided the reserves, as has been just suggested by some over many years, we would be in the present situation we are in now, maybe 5-10 years ago. And then we would really be in a dangerous position. If this amendment is successful, it will immediately trigger a review of the priorities of the council in terms of staffing and in terms of the services we deliver. I think Mr. Murray mentioned earlier today about our policies being impact assessed. I mean, I think if this amendment was impact assessed, it would fail in seeking to help the people it really seeks to help. It will not succeed in supporting the people Mr. Murray and supporters are seeking to help, because it would put us in an even worse situation. We would have to find not only 600,000 in this financial year, but we'd have to double down and find it in the next financial year as well. So, and that's going to hurt our communities and reduce our public services to reduce them probably to a statute. Would be left to just provide statutory services. That's what we're coming to now. We really are coming to the cliff edge in terms of our finances. And if we really want to help our communities and minimise the impact of our reduced budgets, we should support the motion and have this modest rise to try and minimise the worst aspects of the settlement that we have had. I don't think I have anything else to add at this point.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crichton. Does any other member want to come in? I'm seeing your hand is raised, Councillor McLean, but you can only speak once in the debate, so I can't allow you in a second time. Councillor Mustafa Hussain.
Thank you very much, Convener. And I don't have a lot more to add to what previous speakers said, but I just wanted to highlight, obviously, we all understand where the debate is, you know, about protecting the vulnerables and protecting the low-income families. But I think, like previous supporters of the motion said, I would say that I think Councillor Gordon Murray said that we're increasing the burden. I don't see it that this increase, it's not about increasing the burden. It's about trying to protect the vulnerable from service cuts that will affect them. If it's not this year, it's definitely in the future years. So the way I look at it, it's we are faced with a decision that we have to make at the moment and protect the impact from, you know, service cuts that we have to consider at some point if we don't do this increase. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hussain. Do any other members want to come in? Final call before I ask the mover of the motion, who's the leader, and the mover of the amendment, Councillor Susan Thompson, to sum up for us. Joe, no. Okay. So the mover of the amendment, sums up first. So Councillor Susan Thompson.
Thanks for that, convener. And I want to thank all colleagues here for your input into this debate. Every decision that we make has consequences, and some of them are unintended. Freezing the council tax for this financial year will have consequences. But make no mistake, increasing the council tax by 5% will also have consequences, and they will be felt most harshly by the people we are taking action in other areas of this council to protect. I'm proposing that we use some of our reserves, which we all agree are going to have to use at some point. I acknowledge that there are pressures that we can't affect when we talked about the increase in water rates, but we can affect this. It is within our power. We're in the very fortunate position, due to the prudent decisions that were taken in previous councils, that we have these reserves. We've got evidence from 2 research organisations, the Poverty Alliance and the Robertson Trust, that demonstrate that increasing the council tax will have a disproportionate impact on those already struggling financially and will push many into debt and arrears. And they are the very people that we are trying in our deliberations to protect. We have the funds in reserve to offer some support to struggling families now, and therefore again I urge you to please support this amendment to freeze council tax for this financial year. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Can I ask now the leader who is moving the motion to sum up, please?
Thank you very much, convener. And again, I'd like to thank everyone else who's contributed to the debate. It's been an interesting discussion, but what I would say is that in an ideal world, I would actually quite like to accept this amendment. In fact, I would like for it not to have been an amendment, as we'd ideally be in a position to maintain or increase our services from other funds, and it could have been the recommendation. Unfortunately, ideally clashes with the reality of the situation we find ourselves in, a situation that requires prudent management of the funding opportunities available to us for this and subsequent years. If we don't want to cut services to deal with, amongst other things, a current inflation rate of around 10%, then we need funds to do so. Taking one-off funds of £600,000 from our remaining uncommitted reserves, which this amendment proposes, leaves us with very little ability to react throughout the year to pressures and potentially accelerates our need to investigate compulsory redundancies. As I said previously, I believe the proposed increase of 5%, half the rate of inflation, is a reasonable compromise between maintaining our services and operations and not imposing high tax burdens on residents. Freezing the council tax, however, will severely restrict the council's ability to maintain services, to help those hardest pressed and most in need, and the amendment, in my view, could actually do more harm than good to the very people it suggested helps, as it's more important than ever that we can provide services to them. Discretionary services, such as those provided by the inclusion officers, have come from unrestricted funds, supporting hundreds of islanders to claim the benefits they're entitled to. With diminished or used up reserves, there is no capacity within the budget and no service can be provided. The colony recognises the real hardship faced by members of our community and even some members within this council. For those struggling and unable to pay council tax, there is a full council tax reduction available. For others, the 5% increase equates to £1.18 per week for Band D taxpayers, and as I said before, 89% of our properties are in Bands A to D. As one of the largest employers in the islands, we provide work that allows many to have a warm home and put decent, wholesome food on their tables. But we also support them and others equitably through other initiatives to access help and support. Local authorities, like the Scottish Government, have constraints on their abilities to raise funds. The Scottish Government solution was to increase the tax take, and they've given councils the discretion to increase their tax take too. So, as well as the reasons I've just mentioned, I think it would be unwise of us to not use the fiscal levers available to us on one hand when we're campaigning for increased funding on the other. It just wouldn't be credible in the eyes of the Scottish Government. I believe freezing the council tax would be the wrong decision. Retaining some flexibility to do good with what little uncommitted monies we have makes all the difference. So I commend this proposed increase to members.
Thank you very much, Leader. We will now go to a vote. So the best way to do it, obviously with people online and in the chamber, is to do a roll call. So I will ask Derek Mackay, the Elections and Governance Manager, to do the roll call.
If members could clearly articulate motion or amendment when I call your name, please. Convener?
Motion.
Leader?
Motion.
Deputy Leader,
Motion.
Kenneth John McLean,
Motion.
Ian A. McNeil,
Motion.
Ian M. MacLeod,
Motion.
Susan Thompson,
Amendment.
Mustafa Hussain,
Motion.
Ushan Robertson,
Motion.
Paul Finnegan,
Motion.
Grant Fulton,
Motion.
Robert Mackenzie,
Motion.
Angus Morrison, Ranald Fraser, Norman MacDonald, John Norman MacLeod,
Motion.
Donald McSween,
Motion.
Donald F. Crichton,
Motion.
John A. McKeever, Carl McLean,
Motion.
Ian M. Macaulay, Malcolm K. MacDonald,
Motion.
George Murray,
Motion.
Ray Mackenzie, Francis Murray, sorry, George Murray.
George.
I call George Gordon Murray. I apologize.
Deliberate.
Amendment.
And Finlay Stewart. That's 22 for the motion, 5 for the amendment.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mackay. We'll now consider the second amendment proposed by Dr. Francis Murray against the motion. So the order of debate will be the mover of the motion, the leader, then the mover of the amendment, Dr. Francis Murray, the seconder of the motion, Councillor Duncan McInnes, and the secondary of the amendment, Gordon Murray, and any other member of the Comhairle can speak after the mover and seconder of the motion on the amendment gets their say. Can I remind members again, in a debate, you can only speak once. So no one can speak 2 times in a debate unless you've got a point of order. So I'll ask the mover of the motion, Councillor Steele, to start.
Thank you very much, Convener. And like with the previous amendment, I think you've heard my views on the budget strategy. I think it's the right thing for us to do. I appreciate the amendment coming forward, so I won't take up any more of your time. And again, I'll try and sum up at the end based on the debate that comes forward. So thank you.
Councillor Francis Murray, who is moving the amendment.
Thank you, Convener. I'm moving this amendment, fully accepting that the suggestions that have been made in good faith, in straitened times, and with due consideration. Officials, as we've heard, have put a great deal of work into these proposals, and I recognise that work. When we, as a group of councillors, were elected in May, no one could have foreseen the consequences of the foolish mini-budget. £1.7 billion disappeared from the value of the Scottish budget at a stroke, and that obviously affects our budget as a council. And so those of you who have wrestled with all these figures have my thanks and my sympathy. J.K. Galbraith, the Scottish economist, said the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. And I'm very glad I don't have to do the wrestling with the figures. However, my reasons for making the amendment can be summed up in the words timing, impact and review. Firstly, I want to remove that link between savings in secondary staffing and the timetable review work. The review group is only due to meet next week for a second time, and consequently we're at a very early stage of deliberations, while timetabling in the 4 secondaries is well underway. I therefore think we should be cautious about appearing to circumvent that review process. So I'm making the suggestion, instead of saying 4 full-time equivalent staff across the 4 schools, to change that to 2, as this to me seems much more manageable for the service. Being aware from my former professional life that asking schools to find fractions of posts is much more doable at this juncture, especially where staff may wish to take, for example, advantages of family-friendly policies, and go to fewer days a week or some, these sort of arrangements. Since I submitted the amendment, I have spoken to the Director, Mr. MacDonald. I thank him for that. And he's informed me that these secondary staffing reductions may well be met without any recourse to timetabling changes at all, which would be welcome. But this will not be the case in following years. By then, the group, the timetabling group, should have completed its work and we can return to the proposal. I do believe, however, that increasing rather than decreasing choice for young people should lie behind our deliberations. Only this week, Professors Mark Priestley and Marina Shapira at Stirling University have published a study which warned that unintended consequences of timetable changes in the senior phase have meant decreased choice for Scotland's young people, particularly in S4. So we do need to be mindful of that. Secondly, I think we're all aware that there are increased pressures on the whole additional needs services as a direct result of the COVID lockdowns. I totally accept that a review of the service may lead to more efficiency and streamlining as suggested. My issue is with the loss of 100,000 from the frontline service at this particular time, where so many children and young people have had these interruptions to their learning and their routines. Indeed, ensuring that needs are met in the short term may actually lead to services in the longer term. So I would urge you to await the results of the review before deciding on making impact of delivery in schools. And finally, turning to the library service, which is also undergoing review, I would like to propose holding off making these savings from this service until the review is completed. Going into the review with a stated savings of 100k hamstrings that process just as it's getting underway. The libraries, both static and mobile, are performing valuable services for some of the most vulnerable and isolated people in our communities as we're coming out of COVID and in the midst of the cost of living crisis. Indeed, I would suggest that similar work to those of the community organised warm rooms will already been met in our libraries. There are some excellent ideas around to discuss around sort of joined up services, which would allow us to maximise the use of the library facilities rather than cutting them back. And I would urge colleagues to look at these in the months to come as the review progresses. I would also suggest that there may be other budgets which could support the digital inclusion element of what our libraries do, and we should fully explore these. Finally, in terms of the cost of my amendment, I believe the savings accruing from the teachers' industrial action can be used to meet the shortfalls being proposed here, particularly if the secondary staffing is being met without having to have recourse to the timetable review. I do sincerely hope that these will indeed be one-off savings. I'm aware that you cannot include in a budget a one-year only saving, and I certainly hope we won't be sitting here next year talking about teacher strikes. However, these savings have occurred, and I feel strongly that these should be spent within education and to mitigate the proposals laid out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Can I now call on the seconder of the motion, Councillor Duncan McInnes, to speak?
Thank you, Convener. Certainly the amendments before us, are all within the education budget, and clearly each department had the opportunity of putting forward, without any pressure whatsoever from members or anyone else, what they could see as savings that could be done within their own department, within each of their own departments, and looking at what we have in front of us here is, looking at 300,000. So 300,000 is significant when we're looking at 600,000 at 5% of our council tax. So when you look at it in percentage terms, it's pretty significant when we're looking at overall things. And despite the savings that the Comhairle have accumulated over these strike days to date, it's obvious that the winter allowance budget has been oversubscribed, and certainly looks like we're not finished off probably cold weather yet. That there'll be more drawing down on the winter gridding, and any flexibility that we've had previously within budgets when we've got a prudent management on it. We've seen already that has allowed us to provide 495,000 as part of the support fund that we did provide to those that are vulnerable within our community. So that's a clear indication where we do have flexibility by not rushing into a decision, to make additional savings, which departments are saying can be achieved with minimal disruption within their own departments. And finally, on the library service, we all know, the mobile service and the main services that we do have in Stornoway here, and any review that will take place of that can be accommodated as we go along, and we discuss those as the member officer working group when we're moving forward in further discussions on that. So I would second the leader and move that we don't support this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor McInnes. Can I now ask the seconder of the amendment, Councillor Gordon Murray, to speak?
Thanks, Convener. I'd like to thank Councillor Francis Murray for the very important amendment that is before us today. I'm very happy to second Councillor Murray's amendment, and given her vast experience in this sector, I think it's very important that we take cognizance of what she is presenting today. I have no real wish to add any more to what Councillor Murray has said in her opening statement and presenting the amendment. However, I feel that we should really be protecting ASN rather than reducing resources. And a question I'd like to ask the council leader is, can you confirm that the mobile library service will be secure if you put forward this cut? And an aside, Councillor McInnes was talking about significant amounts. We paid 700,000 in costs with regards to the Lewis Castle, and there was no mention of any cuts to services or compulsory redundancies. I feel there's a little bit of an imbalance here when we try and help services and help our people when these scare stories are put forward to us today. So I am full support of the amendment, and I thank Councillor Murray for bringing it forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Murray. Does any other member want to speak? Anyone in the chamber or anyone joining us online? Councillor Paul Finnegan.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to support the motion. Obviously, when we were putting the budgets together, we have to identify budget savings in every not in every, but in categories. We have to show a balanced budget on, and so we have to put savings figures to savings so that we can actually present this budget today. As has been said, the library's review is taking place, and there's not necessarily the situation that 100 grand will be taken from that budget in savings, but we have to identify this. We have to put something against it, and we have to identify that. So, we have to do that work. Equally, if we don't take money from that, we have to look to take it from somewhere else. Regarding the timetabling and the harmonisation, again, that's processing ongoing, and again, we have to put something against that to show there's a possible saving there. That's just been the responsibility of the director and the staff and his staff to show where there are possible savings for us, and that is one area where there is possible savings. So I think that the director and the team have been very prudent in the way that they've approached it. There's no guarantee. So long as we manage to make those savings, that 100 grand, for example, will be taken from libraries, but we have to sort of show that there is a possible saving there. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Finnegan. Do any other members want to speak in this debate? Callum McLean online.
Thanks, convener. I'll try to be as brief because my voice is going. I've had this non-COVID virus for the last few days, so you can bear with me. I may not last out, but can I thank Councillor Murray for bringing this in. Particularly apt is the second part, is to implementing the reduction of ASN support. Let me say first of all that ASN in schools as additional support needs is used for most often those who are most vulnerable. So you're going to what we must watch what we're doing here is that when we do cuts, that we watch that they do not affect the most vulnerable. Secondly, I agree with what Mrs. Murray says. I would wish that the review had been made first. If you're going to make changes, you should do the review first and then affect the changes from that. We've been waiting for a review for ASN for the past 3 to 4 years. We haven't got it. I take it there's a review going on in the library, and we've been waiting for the harmonisation of timetables for a number of years as well. So I would say that we're jumping the cart before the horse. We're taking, but my main emphasis is the implementation of an ASN of 100,000 taken out of a very, very vulnerable members of our society. Some of us who worked in schools know the work that is going on for us for these pupils, and to reduce that affects not only them but the families and the teaching staff. That it demoralizes teaching staff as well. I know teaching staff, and I've said it all along, that it's the conditions in teaching staff. I wish teachers would go on about the conditions rather than the pay. By the way, it's to do with a classroom, a large classroom of 20 to 30, and within that classroom there are a number of boys and girls, and it's not their own fault. Let's be honest. They just cannot keep up with the work. So they have to have additional support. And therefore, I would caution against this motion here. That's what I would say, first of all. The last thing I would say is we're hitting a time in schools where our standards are reducing. We've got a reduction in standards, particularly, and those people who are involved in the teaching profession, in literacy and numeracy. If we're going to reduce additional support needs in these areas, their standards are going to drop. We've got an overcrowded curriculum as it is, and we need as much support for these pupils. But I must tell members, we have to emphasise the fact that this cut in number 2 here is affecting the most vulnerable. And that's why I support the amendment.
Thank you very much, Councillor MacLean. Councillor John Norman MacLeod.
Thank you, convener. Well, I am going to be voting for the amendment. I don't want to see any cuts in the ASN. I'm in touch quite often with families with special needs, etc., over in our own ward. And we've had meetings with them. We know the difficulties they're having. So most definitely, I don't want any cut in ASN. Also, mobile libraries, well, we fought for them. I know that they're getting reviewed. There might not be a cut there, but we did get our ward councillors did get an email from a concerned constituent who uses that mobile library after he had cancer, etc., etc., and he says it was a great service, which it is. So I will be voting for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor MacLeod. Any other members want to speak before we sum up? No one in the chamber. No one. Councillor Susan Thompson.
Thanks, convener. The timing does seem particularly unfortunate. If there's a review or reviews ongoing, then I don't really know that we can make an informed decision, and it appears counterproductive to rush into a decision before the recommendations of the review are known. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Ray McKenzie.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I wasn't going to come in on this, but I am concerned about the ASN support, and they are the most vulnerable people, and if we can't support them, it's a poor show. And it also, Councillor Murray touched on the fact that we've lost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds in legal fees, and yet we're talking here about 100,000 for the most vulnerable people. On the third one, the library service at the last count was cut from 21 down to 14 people, which is a third. Any other department in here wouldn't survive with that. I don't know what the present numbers are, but I don't think they'll be much higher than that. So it says here on the recommendation that any shortfall to be funded from the savings accruing from industrial action by teachers. So it's not a case that there isn't money there or we're dipping into any contingencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Donald McSween.
I think with looking at the two amendments, I have to admit that I had made my mind up quite quickly on the first one. But this one, I am still undecided right now because I have lots of questions about this, and I understand the point that Councillor McInnes made about the winter maintenance side of things. Yes, there's potentially going to be a cold spell next week that could wipe out all this, but equally there might not be. I think I've just got so many questions that I'm not 100% sure at all how I'm going to vote in the next minute or two. I think it is important to protect ASN support. I have been well, I've got a family member who's received that over the years, not currently receiving this ASN support. I've helped deliver some of it myself over the years, and as Councillor MacLeod raised moments ago about the library, the mobile library service as well. I am much more inclined to support this, despite all the questions that I have. I don't know if people are able to answer these questions just now. I'm particularly interested in the fact that Councillor Murray asked the leader to confirm some details about the mobile library service. That would be useful. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what points are going to be made in the summing up.
Thank you, Councillor McSween. Councillor Ian Macaulay.
Thanks, Chair. I find myself much in the same position as Councillor McSween next to me, but I am heartened by the fact that this, if you like, money is coming from a windfall that we didn't know was going to be there a few months ago. And that's definitely swaying me in one direction, with the fact that that money, as Councillor Murray has said, should only rightly be going back into education, and I think that's a really good idea. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Macaulay. Any other member want to come in before we ask the mover of the amendment, mover of the motion to sum up? Okay, so can I ask Dr. Francis Murray, who is the mover of the amendment, to sum up? Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Convener, and I must say that the excitement is mounting as I wait to see how Councillors McSween and Macaulay vote. I won't take much of your time. I just want to say, to reiterate my point, that this is about review and timing, and we're looking at proposals here before to make cuts before we've had the reviews, and I would just ask that in the interim, the money saved from as a result of the strikes is used while the reviews take their process, and we see how things can be improved if possible, and look at all alternatives. Thank you.
Councillor Murray, can I ask now the leader who is moving the amendment, the motion to sum up, please.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to thank Dr. Murray for her considered views on this amendment and all the contributors to the debate, especially the chair of the Education Committee. I'll address Councillor Gordon Murray's points first in terms of confirming the mobile library service is secure. The work that will be done through the library group that's looking at it at the moment, it will be up to them to come forward with proposals. So the general feeling I get from members is it is a service that is very valuable. We obviously committed to it last term, so in my eyes, I think it will come back, but I'm not going to presume what's going to happen through that process. But as much as I can confirm, that's probably as close as I can go. In terms of the finances you mentioned, I mean, we can only deal with the budget in front of us. You know, what's happened in the past has happened in the past, but in the current situation. So I'll not go over too much of the information I've already shared in the budget speech, as I'm sure you're all aware by now of the precarious financial position we find ourselves in. So I would like to reiterate my thanks to everyone who's contributed to the budget setting process. We've looked at proposals from departments as to where savings can be made, and the 3 areas mentioned in this amendment are options that came through that process. And is in some ways reassuring that, council tax aside, there are only 3 areas where members aren't in total agreement with the proposals put forward by our officers and fully endorsed by all members up until this point. And I hope that is a sign that the work we all do throughout the year allows us to come to this budget setting process with a certain degree of alignment and recognition of what we need to do as a council for the people of these islands. So the 3 proposals put forward as savings here are reasonable, and we need to be able to make decisions. You know, the situation we're in with finances, we need to be able to make these decisions and take savings going forward. Should our future budgets be reduced even further by not taking this £300,000 saving, that would equate to a 2.5% council tax increase next year just to recoup this loss saving, as it's not a recurring saving before we look at anything else. I would suggest that taking advantage of savings accrued through industrial action isn't strategic, and we hope it won't be recurring, as that would mean the Scottish Government, COSLA and the unions haven't agreed a position on teachers' wages. So I'll try to summarise the detail behind the 3 proposals. Proposals which the department put forward to meet their share of the savings required within the Comhairle, proposals which mean savings don't need to be found elsewhere this year. So in number 1, the department identified the savings by reducing some posts at the request of current staff members and by reducing some posts within the department. It will not have an impact on timetabling or streamlining, so I think the proposal is fair and sensible. In terms of number 2, the department proposes the removal of support for learning, SFL, and additional support needs, ASN, posts that have been vacant and unfilled for 1 year. It also proposes discontinuing the fixed-term additional PTLS post in the Nicholson Institute, which was linked to an ASN review in the school. Furthermore, the review and update of ASN transport policy to ensure consistent compliance, as well as ensuring support for learning assistants and teachers operates strictly by audit allocation, which would reduce additionality and time-limiting temporary requests for additional ASN staffing support. Number 3 is slightly more complicated in that the review of library services is ongoing, and we need to be mindful of the fact that the £100,000 of savings or increased income generation through the service may not be possible, but it is right that it's been identified as a possible saving. Due to retirements, we need to be careful and consider the future direction of the service, whilst being mindful of the need for savings to be identified fairly and equitably and not passed on to other areas of service. So to finish, I think that the savings proposals are reasonable in the current financial climate and will help us to set a balanced budget this year with an eye on next year, and I commend it to you.
Thank you very much, Leader. So we'll now go straight to the vote, and again we will do a roll call, and I will ask Derek Mackay, the Elections and Governance Manager, to read out.
And again, if members could clearly indicate motion or amendment when I call your name. Convener.
Motion.
Leader.
Motion.
Deputy Leader. Kenneth John McLean.
Motion.
Ian A. McNeil.
Motion.
Ian M. MacLeod. Motion. Susan Thompson.
Amendment.
Mustafa Hussein.
Motion.
Ushan Robertson.
Motion.
Paul Finnegan.
Motion.
Grant Fulton.
Amendment.
Robert Mackenzie. Angus Morrison. Ranald Fraser.
Amendment.
Norman MacDonald. John Norman MacLeod.
Amendment.
Donald McSween.
Amendment.
Donald F. Crichton.
Motion.
Johnny McKeever. Calvin McLean.
Amendment.
Ian M. Macaulay.
Amendment.
Malcolm K. MacDonald.
Motion.
Gordon Murray.
Amendment.
Ray Mackenzie. Francis Murray. George Murray.
Motion.
And Finlay Stewart.
Motion.
There's 16 for the motion, 11 for the amendment.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mackay. Item number 3 on the agenda is committee decision report of the Policy and Resources Committee from earlier on today at 2 o'clock. And it's for approval of the recommendations in the decision report. Leader.
Thank you. I move the committee decision report of Policy and Resources Committee 22nd February 2023 at 2 p.m.
I second that.
Seconded by Councillor Duncan McInnes. With no further business, that concludes the meeting of this council. Thank you all for taking part, and thank you all for your input into such an important meeting, not just the members but also the officers as well. So on the next scheduled meeting of the Comhairle will be on 3rd of May 2023.